Welcome to this webinar, From Avoidance to Confidence, the 24-hour conversation framework. I'm John Fazandia, and welcome to you. If you're watching this as a recording, you can contact me anytime. You can also ask for the handout at the end. Years ago, when I was working in the hospital with people going through recovery from addiction, there was a day that changed me forever. A man sat across from me, completely overwhelmed. He was shaking, exhausted, carrying years of shame and fear. He was trying hard not to fall apart in front of me. And to be honest, I felt out of my depth. Part of me wanted to say something wise and therapeutic, and the other part of me wanted to say, let's both run away and pretend that this never happened. But something in me said, stay. And so I did. And instead of trying to fix him or cheer him up or give him a TED talk, I simply acknowledged what I saw. Not the words, the fear underneath, the loneliness, the weight that he had been carrying alone for many years. And when I did, something shifted. His breathing slowed, his shoulders dropped, and against all odds, the room softened. That moment taught me a truth that I've seen again and again. Most people aren't difficult, they're carrying something difficult. The most difficult conversations aren't about the behavior, they're about the pain underneath it. That's why avoidance hurts so much. When leaders avoid hard conversations, people don't think he must be busy. They think I don't matter enough. And when leaders stay, they stay calm, they stay curious, they stay present enough to acknowledge the emotion, then people settle. They find their footing and relationships begin to heal. This is why I'm offering this webinar and the conflict-free leadership program that I'll talk about near the end. Not to turn managers into therapists, heaven forbid, but to help leaders learn how to sit in the emotional heat without burning up, how to move from avoidance to confidence. And it's not easy. And this is why it's so easy to avoid or put off. So, thank you for being here. Let me start with a simple question. And I want you to actually answer this in your head right now, or even write it on some piece of paper if you've got that. Is there a conversation at work or in your own life that you've been avoiding? Maybe it's a performance issue. Maybe it's behavior that's getting under your skin. Maybe it's a staff member who's frustrated and you haven't addressed their frustration with them. Maybe it's a customer who's gone ape and you still haven't called them back. Now, if you've got one of those conversations sitting in your head right now, you're in the right place. Because here's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at why you avoid these conversations in the first place. What it's actually costing you. And I'm going to give you a simple framework that you can use within 24 hours to handle almost any difficult conversation. Not perfectly, but calmly, clearly, and confidently. So today's agenda, here's what we'll cover. We'll look at reasons why you might avoid conversations. And spoiler alert, it's not about the time that you've got. Secondly, we'll talk about what avoidance actually costs you, not just at work, but emotionally. Third, I'll share a 24-hour conversation framework. It's a simple 6-step structure that you can use immediately. Then we'll work through some of the live examples, some real situations, and we'll finish with a Q&A where you can ask about anything. At the end, I'll share a bit about the conflict-free leadership program for those who want to go deeper. But there's zero pressure, but if you don't think that program's for you, you may know somebody who would benefit. And it could be the best Christmas present that you give them by recommending they do this. And I've got a generous referral package that you will get if you recommend someone who signs up for the program. So whatever, you'll get massive value from today's session. Sound good? So let's dive in. What is it that you would be telling yourself? And why do we lie to ourselves, basically? And the first one might be somebody saying they're too busy. Now, most managers think that they avoid difficult conversations because they think they're too busy. But that's never the real reason. You make time for what matters. You make time for customer emergencies. You make time for your boss when they need something. You make time for fighting fires. So why not this conversation? Because Avoidance isn't about time, it's about emotion. And let me show you what's really going on. Let's explore that a little bit. So here's what you might be avoiding. You're afraid of upsetting someone. You don't want to hurt them. You're worried you'll make things worse. What if they blow up? What if they shut down? Or you don't want to be seen as the bad guy. You'd like to want to be liked. You're anxious about their reaction. What if they cry? What if they get angry? And underneath of it all, you're worried that the relationship will change. Now, these are all emotional fears. They're not time management issues. And here's what makes it worse. You are predicting their reaction before it actually happens. You've already played that conversation out in your head. You've heard the sigh, you've seen the eye rolls, you've watched them storm out before. And here's the problem. Your brain can't tell the difference between what you imagine and what actually happens. So your nervous system responds to the story that you've created, not the real moment. And there was a very good example of this. I was working with a manager once, and who was convinced that one of his staff members was constantly dismissive of him. He'd see her eyes roll, sigh heavily, and he'd interpret it that she thinks I'm incompetent. So I avoided giving her feedback for months. When we finally unpacked it, it turned out that she had chronic back pain. The sighing was her trying to manage her discomfort, and the eye rolling was her actually looking up at the ceiling when she was thinking hard. This was her way of really taking time to think. But he had built an entire story that simply wasn't true. And that story that he had made kept him stuck for months. So your brain does this constantly. It fills in gaps, it predicts danger, and it keeps you frozen. Now, the next way that you can stop yourself is thinking that you need a perfect script. You need to be able to say exactly the right thing. And you tell yourself, I don't know what to say. I need to think more about this. And so you can go right through it. But the magic isn't in having the perfect words, it's in three things. The magic's in your tone, the way you speak, your emotional steadiness, so how you are in the face of their emotion, and your ability to acknowledge what's happening, to simply see and be able to acknowledge it. That's it. You don't need a script, you need a framework. And that's what I'm going to give you today. Another thing that prevents you from having some of these conversations is what you learned growing up. Some of these messages are exactly that. Don't rock the boat. Be nice. Keep the peace. Don't upset people. Avoid conflict. So you can develop these patterns even at home. Even I know that some managers talk about the way they've got teenagers, and so they end up tiptoeing around them a bit because anything they say will be wrong and it will blow up. And so they're walking on eggshells, avoiding conversations because they don't want to damage the relationship. And they bring that same pattern to work. But here's the truth. Avoiding the conversation doesn't protect the relationship. It damages it because silence sends a message too. It says, this behavior is acceptable, or worse, it says, I don't care enough to address this. And your team feels that as well. Incidentally, what you can learn in these programs for work also applies very well for how you might relate to those at home. Another way that you stop yourself from having these conversations is that sometimes you feel just emotionally overloaded. When you're already running hot, stressed, tired, carrying tensions, even small conversations feel like too much. Your emotional muscles are fatigued. This is real. This matters. And it's why that you need a simple framework that doesn't require you to be at your best all of the time. Because most of the time, you're not at your best. You are stressed. There's lots happening. And you need to have a framework that you can use in those moments when you're just trying to get through the day. So that's why you avoid these conversations. Now, let's just talk a little bit about what it's costing you. Here's what you need to understand, because avoidance has a cost and it's higher than you might think. First of all, the cost. The problems grow teeth. The issue doesn't stay small, it spreads, it festers, it builds resentments. What could have been a 5-minute conversation in week one becomes a 45-minute performance management meeting in month 3. And here's my favorite line about this, and I want you to remember it. Silence is not neutral, it's fuel. Silence is not neutral, it's fuel. Because while there's silence, the silence and the vacuum is fueling misunderstanding on all sides. When you say nothing, the problem doesn't go away, it grows. Now, the next point is that silence also destroys trust with your team, particularly. You think you're keeping the peace, but your team experiences it as disengagement. They think you don't care. You saw this behavior and you said nothing. They say, I guess this is acceptable now. And here's what's painful about this. You're avoiding the conversation because you care about the relationship, but your silence is destroying the very thing that you're trying to protect. And then the next cost is it creates more emotional work for you. You're carrying the weight instead of sharing it. You go home and you're still thinking about it. It's inside of you. You're in the shower, ruminating. You're lying in your bed 3 o'clock in the morning, playing out scenarios. Your partner asks, what's wrong? And you say, nothing. I'm just going through a few things. But they can tell that something's off. So this is emotional labor and it's exhausting. And the conversations that you're avoiding at work follows you everywhere. And then this question really of the cost from escalation. Small tensions become big conversations. 5-minute chat avoided in November becomes a formal performance review in February. Lots more people are involved. It's complicated that people are trying to remember what was said back then, who said what, he said, she said, or didn't say, or I did not do that. And all that avoidance doesn't save time. It actually multiplies time. And then avoiding these conversations, it drains your confidence. Every time you avoid a conversation you know that you should have had, it chips away at your sense of yourself as a leader. You start to doubt yourself. You start to feel like you're not cut out for this. You start to wonder if you're good enough. And that's the hidden cost nobody talks about. Because the issue isn't just out there with your team, it's in here, in your head, in your gut, in your heart, just in your whole being. That self-doubt, that lack of confidence actually increases. And that's what we're going to change today. So, what is the solution? Given that avoidance costs you so much time, trust, emotional energy, confidence, let's find, is there a solution? And that's what I want to give you today, is this framework that you can use within 24 hours of realizing a conversation needs to happen. You don't need to be afraid of it. And if you keep this framework in mind, you don't need extra energy for it. In fact, you can do this even when you're stressed. And it's 6 steps. It's simple and it works. Let's have a look at the solution, the simple framework that will make a difference to you. Now, we'll go through each one and I'll show you what to say, what not to say, and how to say it, how to stay steady even when the other person's not. So we're going to acknowledge the emotion first, particularly yours. Start with that within the 24 hours. Describe the behavior, not the story. Acknowledge their world and particularly how they feel, what's going on for them at that level. You're going to make one request and then you'll close with partnership. That's the 24-hour framework. So, step 1, acknowledging their emotion. Now, that's acknowledging yours and theirs, but the foundation of everything that we do in Thriving Under Fire, name it to tame it. Before you walk into a conversation, acknowledge what it is that you're feeling. You can say in your head, I'm feeling anxious because I don't want to upset them. That's it. Just name it. Or I'm angry that they did something stupid. I'm annoyed that this is taking so much of my time. Now, naming your own feelings, and when you name the other person's feelings, you want to avoid judgment. So feelings are neither good nor bad. They simply tell you something about your values, about who you are. Sometimes they remind you of things that have happened in your past. And that's one of the things that can get in the way, because what's happened right now can trigger off memories, unconscious, from your earlier life. And these memories can be very powerful, particularly when they're not named and they're not recognized. And so naming your feelings without judgment. You get curious about them, you accept them. You can be even how interesting that I feel like this. But in the end, if you don't name them, you don't tame them, and then they take over and lead things. This is such an important fundamental thing in developing emotional intelligence, as knowing what you're feeling, accepting that, and being able then to manage it, because they will become less strong when you name them. But even if they are powerful and takes a while for them to settle down, you're not going to have that conversation while you are feeling in a heightened emotional state. You're wanting to actually calm yourself down so that your thinking ability is at its premium. So, naming and acknowledging emotions. Now, when you do this for the other person as well, you're naming the feeling for them, which will also help them calm down because they're going to be upset. So by definition, this is a difficult conversation that you're going to have, and it's difficult because there is feeling involved. And when you name their feeling, then you've got a much better chance of helping them to calm down. So you might say, I guess this might be a bit awkward for you. Or what else might you say at the beginning of a conversation? You might be you'll be wondering what this is about. You might be a little bit afraid of how this conversation is going to go. So by naming that, you just allow it to be there without being scared of it and without making a judgment about it too. One of the things that you can do in this kind of conversation also is when you start a thing like this, but the other person will be thinking that you're going to blame them for whatever's gone wrong, whatever they've done. Chris Voss, who's a FBI negotiator, calls this an accusation audit, and that you acknowledge your part in what this might be. So if this conversation should have happened months ago, you might even say, look, I realize that I've left this a long time before bringing it up, and I'm sorry that it has taken me so long to do that. Or I probably didn't give you clear enough instructions in the first place. And what I want to talk about is what happened yesterday. So you're already acknowledging something which will take a lot of the sting out of them telling you where you've gone wrong because you've already acknowledged it. Because you have somehow contributed to whatever's happened in some way or other. So that's by saying those things, you take the tension out of the air. Now, you want to start the conversation as soon as possible. I call it 24 hours, and I say use these 10 words. Actually, there's 11 words in this little sentence. Can we talk about something that I think will help us? Even if you want to help us both, there's 12 words. But you're wanting to make it safe, neutral, non-blaming, forward-focused. That's the invitation. And also, you want to frame it in a way where they will see some benefit to this conversation. Now, you also might say, let me give a few variations here. I noticed something yesterday and I'd like to check in about it. Could be one thing. Or can we talk about how things went earlier? Or can I share something that I think will help us work better together? So there's a kind of a mutuality about that. You're keeping that flat, you're keeping it non-judgmental. All of these work because they don't put the other person on the defensive. You're not saying we need to talk. That sounds ominous. Or you're not saying you did something wrong because that sounds accusatory. You're inviting them into a conversation with you to solve something together. And this removes 80% of the fear that's in them because you're wanting actually to build something rather than to criticize or knock something down. And then you want to make sure that you are describing the behavior without the story that you put on it. Because when you see something, you will naturally put a story on it. But you want to think about this. So often, even just an example of you putting a story on, saying to somebody, you were rude. That's a story that you've put on it. That's not actually the behavior. That's your interpretation of their behavior. Instead, you might say, I noticed that your tone changed in the meeting. When you describe that behavior, and so many people, so many managers this is where they can go wrong very easily because they build up that story, especially if you've let the conversation, you've spent some time before you've introduced this conversation, that's where that story can grow bigger and bigger in your mind. It's one of the pieces that you might write at 3 a.m. in the morning when you're awake, going, yeah, and they did this as well, and that's the trouble with them. So that you can catastrophize, you can interpret, you can add meaning that's not there. And if you do that and say you were rude to that customer, that's a judgment and that's your story. And what if they weren't trying to be rude? What if they were simply stressed, or what if they were overwhelmed? And now you've accused them of something that they don't think is true, and they'll defend themselves. And of course, the conversation derails. So here's a better way. I noticed your tone changed when the customer raised their voice. Think of that. I noticed that your tone changed when the customer raised their voice. That's it. Observable behavior, no interpretation, no story. Nothing escalates when you stick with what you actually saw or heard, and when you recount that in a factual way without any emotion to it. So the goal here is to stay in what we call the adult ego state, calm, factual, steady, not in the child ego state, which is emotive and reactive, and not in the critical parent, judging and blaming. What you've done wrong is that was completely the wrong thing, critical parent. So just stay steady, observing and describing. Now, step 4, you want to acknowledge their emotional world. There's various things that you can say, but this is a sort of a signature tough move. It's one of the skills that if you get this skill, everything else will become much easier. And this is what changes everything. You're not agreeing with them. You're not saying they're right. You're just simply acknowledging that they have feelings about this without judgment. So here's what that might sound like. I imagine that situation was frustrating for you, or it sounds like you felt dismissed when that happened, or I can see how that might have been overwhelming. Now, why does this work? Well, because acknowledgement de-escalates, and it can do it very quickly with some people. You might have to repeat it slightly or just wait a little bit for whatever you've said to land, but by and large, this calms people down very quickly, or they calm down very quickly when they hear it, I think is probably a more accurate way of saying it. So when someone feels heard, their nervous system records this, and that calms down. Their defensiveness drops because they're with a friend, somebody who gets them. That's when the real conversation becomes possible. And here's what's beautiful about this. You don't have to agree with their perception to acknowledge their emotion. You can say, I can see that you're frustrated, without saying you're right to be frustrated. You might have no idea why they are so frustrated, and they might not have an idea either. It could be because of things that have been triggered from their life before you met them, or even something that's happening at home already, and they come to work, and the level of emotionality, of frustration, or of distress is with them when they walk into work. So what you simply want to do is acknowledge that what they are feeling without judging, without saying you should feel something else or you shouldn't feel that way. You're actually letting them know that you see what they are feeling right now. So acknowledgement is not agreement, it's connection. Now, this is saying it's so fundamental to the whole thriving under fire way that we understand these ways of responding to people. And this is the APE model. There's an action, there's a perception, and there's emotion. And the first thing that you want to do is acknowledge the emotion. I've been teaching this for over 25 years. I've done a lot of face-to-face workshops. Often I do 2 sessions a week apart. The number of people who have come back to me in the second week have come to the group and said, last week I was very skeptical about this when you were teaching this, but that afternoon somebody came into the office or somebody rang me up and they were furious. They were really mad about something. And I simply said, all I could remember was emotion. And they say, so I said, gee, sounds like that was really difficult for you, or sounds like you're really frustrated. And they are amazed at how quickly that person calms down. So this is just such a powerful thing for you to do, is to acknowledge somebody's emotion without any judgment whatsoever. There's no criticism. You're just simply and compassionately really acknowledging this is what they are feeling. Now, you don't have to agree with them. It could be completely outside of your experience. Why would they be so upset about that? That doesn't matter. You're not trying to fix that. You're not trying to understand that. You're simply acknowledging what seems like you're really upset by this, seems like this is highly significant. You've thought a lot about this, whatever it might be. Because once the emotions acknowledge, three things happen. Their brain settles. They get a name for what they're feeling because often they can't think. Their defensiveness drops and the real conversation becomes possible. So sometimes acknowledgement alone solves the problem. Once you acknowledge it, you might not even have to address what their perception is or the action. They might say, yep, that's all I need to do now. I just want you to know what I'm feeling. And when they feel felt, when they feel it as if you get them, that does a tremendous amount for making connection with them. All right, so always start with acknowledging the emotion. Step five, then, what are you going to do? Because often somebody says, is that all there is? Here's one thing you can do. If you're going to give them any coaching or make any requests, just make one. You don't have to give them a list of 10 things that they should then start doing, but make one behavioral change. It's hard for anybody even to make one, let alone to make 9 or 10 different things that they've got to make that they've got to change. Just start with one. And it might sound like this. Going forward, when a customer raises their voice, take a breath. Just you can slow things down, breathe from your belly, and just take that breath nice and easily so that you can stay steady. For instance, that's one thing. Or the next time this happens, come and talk to me before it builds up. Does that work for you? Notice take a breath is an action. Staying steady is an outcome of an action. It's not actually an action. So what you do want to get people to do is take an action that you can actually see the action rather than get an outcome like staying steady. You're giving them something concrete to do. It's not asking them to achieve a feeling. So why one request? Because it's difficult. People can handle micro adjustments, but not whole personality rewrites. When you pile on multiple requests, they're more likely to shut down. They'll feel criticized. They'll stop listening. But one clear, specific request, that's it. And then the final step in this framework, close with partnership. This is where you bring warmth back in. And this is what it sounds like. Look, I value our working relationship and I want us to succeed together. Or I appreciate you hearing me on this. Let's check in next week, see how it's going. Or thanks for talking this through with me. And I know we can figure this out together. Or I can see that you've got a lot of potential and you get over this little piece. There's a lot this will have a big impact on your career or on the way you enjoy work, or it's going to make a big difference to you. So this is the line that changes everything because you're not correcting behavior, you're reinforcing the relationship. You're saying, we're on the same team, I care about you, and I want this to work for you. And that's what people remember. People remember how you make them feel, not what you actually tell them, and particularly in a lecture. So just to recap real quickly, the 24-hour framework. Acknowledge the emotion, yours and theirs, particularly, but yours to start with, to yourself, without judgment. Start within 24 hours or as soon as possible, but certainly signal that you want to have that conversation as quickly as you can once you realize you need to have it. Describe the behavior, not your story. Acknowledge their world, their emotion first before you have that conversation. So you want them to calm down. Make one request if you're going to ask them to do something, and close with a partnership, reinforcing the connection and how you want them to grow as a person and to enjoy their work or to do whatever it is that they're doing. So that brings us to part 4 of our session today, and that is some live examples. I've already referred a little bit to this, but what happens with a staff member who sighs or rolls their eyes, and you notice somebody doing that, and you give them a task. When you give them a task, for instance, they roll their eyes, and even when you're not looking, but others have seen it. So you want to be able to confront this in some way or address this. Probably a better word than confront. You're avoiding the conversation because you're worried that they'll deny it or get defensive, and then it'll all get very sticky and complicated. So here's how this framework might work. First of all, you want to acknowledge your own feelings. I'm feeling uncomfortable about this and that's okay. Or I'm feeling like I'm not even sure if they like me, or if I bring this up, whether they'll actually say what those eye rolls might have meant. So that's a little bit about your discomfort, your hesitation, particularly. And then you want to get onto it as quickly as you can. Look, can we talk about something that I think would help us? I'm a bit unsure about something with you, might be. Number three, you want to describe their behavior. So I've noticed when I assign tasks to you, there's often a big sigh. And I noticed yesterday you did that and again this morning. And I'm wondering what that means for you, because I'm not quite sure what it means. And so that's what you are describing in terms of what they're actually doing, rather than saying, putting some story on it. When you roll your eyes, you are obviously disengaged or something like that. Step four is acknowledging their world. So what I'm imagining is that you might be feeling overwhelmed by that, or that you feel like this might just be somehow another burden that you're going to get. Is that what's happening? And then be quiet and let them talk. If they say nothing, well, you say, this might be difficult for you to say, and you might be afraid of how I'm going to respond. But I reckon I want to get a really good, strong way of working with you. And so it would be helpful for me, certainly, if you could let me know. It might just be I say the wrong thing, or do I speak too much, or do I say too little? You could give them a few options like that if they were initially not prepared to tell you what their sighing and eye rolling might be about. And then you can make one request. So look, there's a step five. So if you're feeling overloaded, I need you to tell me directly instead of sighing. Would you be able to do that? It might feel a bit risky for you, but just tell me and we can work it out, because my job is to allocate resources and time for tasks. And then step six is you close with partnership. So I want us to work well together. I want to understand you and some of your challenges. And I think if you do tell me, this will help me an awful lot. And I guess it would help you as well. That's it. Clear, calm, direct.
I've got an example. It's Margaret here. It's a little bit different from a manager to a team member scenario. It's more a team scenario where you're in like a team meeting and team members are openly sniping at each other, but subtly. And you're part of that team, but the behaviours it's not acknowledged, or we're all sitting there feeling uncomfortable. What is something that you could do? Could you do something then and there, or would it be something you would address after the meeting and talk to the person outside the meeting, even though they are not reporting to you?
Yeah, it's a great example, really, isn't it? Because I'm sure others have also been in that situation. And there's that awkwardness for a start. It's almost like, was that snipe? Was that a bullet, or did I just imagine it whizzing past my ear? Generally, the first principle would be that you address it in the meeting. There was a lovely example of where this happened on even a bigger scale than a simple team meeting. And it was down south. I was running workshops, and I usually run these workshops a week apart. And after one of the participants came back the second week, and she said, I had this fantastic opportunity to do this during the week. I belonged to a golf club, and we were having this meeting about whether the golf club would close. It wasn't viable or something. And the room was full of people, and the tension was just electric, she said. And they were saying things that were a bit like this. And so she stood up at one point and she said, there's a lot of strong feeling in this room at the moment. And just by mentioning that, naming it like that, she said everybody went, yes, there is. And she said she could feel how the tension dropped just by naming it. So when you think about this in a team meeting, you might have 5 or 6 or more people sitting around a table, and you say, what I'm noticing at the moment is that there's a lot of tension that we've got going, and there's a lot of strong feeling. Does anybody else feel that? Now, if they all deny it, that's the next step. But mostly people will go, yes. Well, and maybe even if you're not the team leader, you could say, could we just even have a bit of a session where we talk about the feelings? You could say, we just simply say what it feels like for me to be in this without blaming anybody. You'd put a couple of little conditions around it like that. So you're just going to talk about yourself for a moment. And there might be things that are happening in the team, and there might be some things outside of the team that cause this to you. How does that sound?
That sounds good. It's helpful because you're never quite sure whether to actually, for that reason of why you don't confront at the time, especially when it's in a wider group. So that example and the wording that you used is, yeah, quite helpful. Yeah, I have done it once or twice before in the team, and yeah, you did feel straight away the fact that someone actually brought it up. It did open the door for a further discussion to be had. So I guess it's just keeping on chipping away at it each time that it occurs.
Yes, it does fit into that thing that talking about these feelings is scary because you don't know, is the whole team going to fly apart if you even bring it up once or allow somebody to say it? Providing you put a few little boundaries and that you say whatever you are feeling is acceptable, but you don't have to act on your feelings. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean to say you have to smash the wall or punch somebody up. And we'll work in a no blame. So these feelings have developed over time, or these difficulties have developed over time. We've all contributed either by saying things or not saying things. Give it that kind of a framework if it's needed. And even if you start and then it gets a wee bit out of hand, you can always go, hang on, what I'm noticing is, let me put a couple of boundaries around this so it doesn't just spill over. So you can do that even in the middle of a conversation if people aren't following it well.
Yep.
That
Thank you.
makes sense?
Yes, no, it does.
Yeah. Cool. Care, you and your neighbour's chickens coming over. Yes, with neighbours, even just with team members, there's something really powerful in building relationships outside of the problem, so that the only time you talk to them is not to tell them off about their chickens. Or it's the same with a team member. If you've got a team, that the only time you talk to people is when you're going to give them some correction. So that would be one thing about that. I do know I was talking to somebody who didn't come on the program in the end, but he said, I've got this very good relationship with one of my workers. We have a beer every Friday. We're the best of mates. And then I tell him he's got to do some work or give him some feedback about his work, and it just doesn't land. So this can be quite difficult, especially if your neighbors, if their minds are not on the job. Sometimes they can't quite take in what you're saying. It's probably not so much in a work situation if you've got somebody like that whose brains don't actually work. So here's a question. Let me share a little bit about you. What if you could practice these skills every week for 26 weeks with real situations, with direct feedback, with a group of managers who actually get it? That's what the conflict-free leadership program is all about. And I'd like just to share a little bit about that with you. So the 6 months we meet weekly for group coaching. You bring actual workplace challenges to each session, the customer you dread calling, the conversation you've been avoiding, the team tension that's building. We practice with real situations, real plays, not role plays from a book. Every week you try something different, bring the results back, get direct feedback, and build your learning slowly. And because you can't, this is not just one and done kind of process. You really need to build up that understanding and that practice week by week. I've been running this program this year, and the people that have done it have found it incredibly helpful. Even just a couple of those comments that they've made. The program has given me confidence. I'm able to connect without escalating. People told me, you're a lot calmer than you used to be. We expected you to rise to that, and you didn't. That was a manager who'd come from a very high pressure kind of corporate environment and wasn't adjusting so well to the easy educational institution that he was now working in. And he just said, not only did he feel a difference, but his colleagues did as well. And another one said, I can deal with situations now in a way I simply couldn't do before. It's been successful multiple times, and that's a great feeling. Another of them said when he first got his job as a new manager about 12 months before, he needed to get some of his senior managers to help him sit with him when he had difficult conversations to have. He started doing the program after 2 or 3 months. He was telling them about this. They used to then come to him and say, how do I deal with this difficult person? What would John teach about this moment? And then he was now coaching some of his senior managers. And almost best of all, a lot of people mention, if they've got teenage children, for instance, how it can change the way that they relate to those kids. And one manager said, I talk differently with my daughter now. I listen to what's important to her instead of lecturing, which was my natural way of doing things. So these aren't corporate training toolkits. They're tools that work under pressure in real moments with real people. Who is it for? It's for anybody, a manager, particularly if you're managing people. If you're tired of carrying work stress home, you want fewer emotional blow-ups, you want more confidence in difficult moments, and you want to start 2026 feeling steady instead of scrambling. If you've had enough of those things, those difficulties, this kind of constant repeating, challenging conversations, then this is the kind of program for you. And if that's you, let's talk. And you can do that by booking a 45-minute game plan call. This is a zero cost to you, zero obligation. You get a lot from this conversation, whether you choose to do the course in the end or not, it almost doesn't matter, because what you'll get is clarity about yourself, your own functioning, what you need to do next so that you can become a much more competent, emotionally intelligent leader. And sometimes you might be able to work out you can do that on your own. Other times you might say, yeah, I want to join this course, in which case that's all good. You can book a game plan call. The link will be in the notes to this recording. I am offering a referral bonus. And if you want an information pack, you can email me. And if somebody that you recommend takes up the program and enrolls in the program, then you will get a $500 restaurant voucher where you can go and indulge yourself and your partner, your friends, whoever, without having to worry about having to pay the whole lot. Or you can just keep going back to the same restaurant on your own if that's what you want to do. So here's my final thought for today. The conversations that you're avoiding is costing you more than having the conversation, than actually having that conversation ever could. The stress, the rumination, the confidence drain, the tension erosion. You don't need perfect words. You don't need to be tougher. You just need a framework. And now you have one. So use it in the next 24 hours and see what happens. And if you want to build this into a long-term skill, I'd love to help you with that as well. Okay, let's just finish up there. If you want the framework, a copy of this, you can, if the link is not already in the notes, you can email us and we will send you the framework or the link so you can download that framework for yourself. And thank you very much for sharing. Let me just finish there. Thank you for watching this program, this webinar. And if you've got any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. And if you even just want a quick conversation to a clarity call, it doesn't have to be the full 45 minutes. It could just be something short and sharp. Be very happy to talk with you. I'm John Fazandia, and thank you for watching this webinar.